Okay, so we're going for the nitty gritty at home freezing cold day version of helping our back with the ball. This ball is a little too big for me. Ideally you want it to be 90 degrees at feet, knees, and hips, but I'm just going to start by placing myself on top of the ball and giving myself a couple sways back and forth. Just trying to move the hips. Let your shoulders move with it if you need to, but if you can kind of isolate, keeping the chest somewhat still and just move from below the ribs, it can be a little more helpful for the low back. When I'm real tight, I just let my whole body sway first and then try and isolate. And then make sure you've got good footing. I've got kind of slippery socks on, but I'm not willing to take them off. Then I'm going to think about taking a nice deep breath in. Every time you inhale, really think about lifting the spine up as much as you can. We're trying to take that weight and pressure off of where the hips and spine connect. I hold my ribs just to try and focus on keeping them still, and then I'm just going to do tiny circles. You got lucky, and I decided to go ahead and make this video today because my low back is quite sore, and it would probably really benefit me to go through these things myself. Try and make the circles a little bit bigger, slow down if you need to, but mostly what's really happening here is kind of that pelvic tilt. Things start to feel a little better, come back to center. Again, make sure you're solid on your feet. Inhale and lift the spine, and we're going to make little circles the other way, and I'm just going to turn the view so that you can see what's happening there as far as hip tilt. As things loosen up, I'm trying to make that circle as wide as I can. Back to center, bring myself up tall, and essentially I'm just going to do a bigger version of that hip tilt, so like seated cat and cow. As I exhale, I'm going to let my knees bend further, and I've rolled so that instead of sitting up on the ball, that ball's pushing into the back of my butt, lower back, and I'm leaning back into it as much as I can. Let your head drop forward, let your shoulders pull forward. You can kind of anchor your hands on your knees so you get as much flex in your back as you can. Your breathing will be compressed here, but sometimes that's good. It forces that breath kind of in the back of our rib cage and helps to loosen up that area a little bit more. When I go to come up, I'm going to push through my feet first so that I'm kind of pushing my hips back, and then I'm going to bring myself forward so that I'm arching my back as much as I can, leaning forward. And then if you want, you can even slide the hands back, bringing the shoulders and elbows back behind you, so you're sort of engaging the muscles between the shoulder blades and opening the chest. And I generally hold these for several breaths when I start. If it feels good, you can move into exhale and round. Inhale and extend, but feel free to take as many breaths there as you need to. Good. Back to center, just kind of shake it out, stomp it out. I like to use this as a seated forward fold, so you just bending from the waist really. I'm going to think about first rolling back so that I can push my heels into the floor, lift my toes. We're just really straightening and stretching the back of the legs some first. What I like about this as well, when you push back, actively press the back of your thighs into the ball. I'm going to take a deep breath in, come up as tall as I can through the spine, and then trying not to round the back. I'm just hinging forward from the waist. I don't recommend coming any further forward than you can, keeping that spine long. It's a very different stretch once we round. Not that you shouldn't do that, but I usually try and lift from the spine, so I'm lifting into the hips, push back, and then just hinge forward, trying to keep that back straight. At that point, when I have everything nice and lengthened, I'm going to wag my tail. You'll see me do this a lot because it saves my low back a lot of pain, but really just moving a little bit from one side to the other. At this point, I'm going to let my kneecaps soften so that it takes a little bit of that tight stretch out of the back of the legs, puts a little more of it into the low back. Just small motions, but that way we get a little more intensity on the stretch on one side and then the other. Usually we're a little tighter on one side than the other, so we don't want that tight side to prohibit a deeper stretch where we can get one. And I'm going to bring myself back to center, and then finally I am going to let myself round. You can let the knees soften if you want, but you're just going to let your spine drape down from the waist. You can let your arms dangle down if you want. Sometimes I'll bring my arms up and kind of push into my low back. Pulling the elbows forward helps to open up the shoulder blades. I'll roll back to my feet being flat on the floor. Walk myself up to my knees and come up. I recommend doing all that stuff slow because when our head's down low, we sometimes get a little dizzy. So I'm taking big steps outward. So I'm kind of in a nice wide straddle, not so much that it's a stretch already. And I'm going to bring my hands to the fingertips to the insides of my knees, and I'm going to hinge forward. As I'm doing this, I'm sort of actively pushing back into the hips as I'm reaching forward through the chest. And then just as added bonus, I'm going to try and roll my elbows forward. So that's really more about the shoulders, but as we have that low back opened from that forward fold, pulling the shoulders up as this does, kind of stretches and pulls the spine upward as well. And I'm going to press into my knees and come up. Let the shoulders roll back. Then I'm just going to walk my hands down to the floor on a good day. And sort of just bow down. Let your elbows soften into the ball. And just let your spine come down horizontal or even deeper if you can. We can almost always get a better stretch for the low back and where the low back and hips connect if we're at a wider stance through our legs. Our hips will be allowed to pivot a little further forward. And when you're ready, I recommend looking up, bringing your head up first. I'll walk it back up. Okay, so this next part, I'm going to be walking out on the ball, so feel free to hold on to the ball at first if you'd like to. They usually don't run away too quickly, but they can get away from you. I'm going to keep walking out until my shoulders and head are supported on the ball and I can drop my hips. At that point, you can do some nice easy squats here just to kind of open up the hip joint. So I'm just rolling forward on the ball, letting my hips drop, and then pushing through my heels and coming up like a bridge. And then I'm going to walk my feet back towards the ball. So I am just rolling so that instead of that ball being underneath my shoulder blades, it's now under my low back. And now I can feel it pushing into the back of my butt and hips. I want to stop in a position so that my hips are the highest part of my body. At that point, I'm going to inhale, lift both arms up, and then let them slowly come back and overhead. So I'm lengthening the front of my body, and I'm trying just to let my back and butt match the curve of the ball. Let your head rest on the ball so you don't need to support your neck. If you can reach, you can walk your feet back just enough so that your feet still touch the ground and your fingertips do as well. And then you don't have to focus on the balance. You can just sort of let your body melt into the curve of that ball. To any extent that you push into your feet and straighten your legs, you're going to feel that open the front hip flexors more, which can actually be one of our causes of low back pain, is tight hip flexors. So at that point, I'm just trying to kind of tighten the butt and push the legs as straight as I can. Now, when you're ready to come up from this, push off with your fingertips. You want to roll your feet, walk your feet down so that that ball is now back underneath your upper back, and lift your head first. Even if that means supporting it with your hands, we don't want that force on your neck. And then we talked about some abdominal strength things. So I'm not curling forward towards my knees. I'm going to try and drive my head straight up towards the sky as I march my feet aggressively back in towards the ball. So here. Good. So a couple things that can help strengthen abdominal muscles that again support the low back. And I think the one that we talked about was walking the feet in a little narrow. Trying to lift your chest, keep upright as much as you can. I'm just going to try and lift that right foot off the ground. You will have all these tiny little supporting muscles that then have to engage through the leg, through the torso to keep that balance. This is sort of the easier version with your knee bent. If you'd like a little more, my words are gone. It's a little harder if you extend through the knee, longer lever. Come back to center. You don't have to do this. I'm just going to lift and try and balance. So you feel that tightening in around your belly, around your obliques, probably in your low back as well. I don't necessarily recommend socks for this. And at that point, it's kind of a little bit more of a challenge for all of your core muscles. I'm going to lift the leg, sweep it out as much as I can, and tap that toe down. Take a big breath in. You're going to really tighten in around that exhale to lift that leg and bring it back in. So nice big arc. And lift and set the toe down. Big breath in, stabilize, exhale, and lift in. You can do that as many times as you want. From here, you can get off the ball and kneel behind it, but I'm going to show you kind of a fun way to get there for when you feel better. So we're going to go back to that wide straddle and go back to that hands on the floor position. And then I'm basically going to do a big frog kick. So I'm going to bring my legs out and then press back, and that brings me on my belly. Alternately, you'll just kneel behind the ball, bring it up right close to you, push off with your feet and roll out. So I'm going to use this to approximate a plank. One of the things I want you to think about is not letting your shoulders ride up. So we're actively pushing down through our shoulders, but we're not locking the elbows. We're keeping a soft bend there. We want to distribute that force as much as we can. At this point, I just have that ball right underneath between my belly button and my thighs. So I'm not supporting a lot of my body weight. I should really change my angle so you can see what I am doing. Okay. So from here, I'm just thinking about little bits of low back strength at a time. So we're just going to start as if we were in plank, tightening the butt. What I like about the ball is you kind of get this reception feedback. So as I'm tightening the butt and I'm squeezing in towards the center, I should almost feel that ball pushing against my thighs as if my thighs are rounding outwards, and they should be. So relax and then tighten the butt and squeeze. You want to feel a little bit of outward rotation through the front of the hips. And relax. You can bring that further into squeeze and then try to lift. So you're partially pushing your hips down, tightening the butt more, seeing if you can elevate the thighs. So from there, I'm now going to walk back on the ball until my feet can touch the floor. And then just a little further, I want to have a little bit of bend in my knees as my thighs rest against the ball. You're gonna have a little better balance if you walk your feet out a little wider. We're making a bigger triangle. And we're just going to let our hips sink into the ball. Let your head drop down. Again, we're just rounding our body around the curve of that ball. You're probably going to be more comfortable. I like to just turn my head from one side at a time rather than trying to push my chin into the ball. And a really good place to work on breath work. As you've noticed, that ball is pressing into your diaphragm, into your belly. So it's a little harder to expand. And that is good. Diaphragm is a muscle, and just like any other muscles, it strengthens when it has to work against that resistance. Give myself just a moment to let things soften and relax. And then, just like we did lying backwards, I'm going to roll forward so that my hips are the highest part of my body. Then I'm just going to let my body drape down across the sides of that ball. If you have a big enough ball that you can like just let your feet come off the ground and still have your hips high, that can be nice. Our legs are heavy, so that gives a little bit of pull in that direction. I could stay there all day, but I won't. I'm going to walk back so that, again, my feet are on the floor. My feet are wider than hip distance apart. I'm going to give you some ideas for a different direction of a back extension. So a lot like a cobra, we're going to start easy and make it harder as we go. So easy, I'm going to just kind of fold my hands on the ball. As I exhale everything out, I'm going to think about pushing my hip bones into the ball, and then inhale and lift. And you can push with your arms a little bit if you want, so that you're not just using muscle, you're using a little force. And we'll soften right back down. Alternately, you can lift the hands and really just use the back to lift the body. Making it a little harder, I'm going to lift and then bring the elbows back behind me, so I'm squeezing the shoulder blades in like a row. This is a really good place to do rows if you want to with weights too. Not yet, until your back feels better. And lastly, sort of bringing those arms up and out front. They can be nice and straight and long or bent, but the more we extend in front of us, the more we're putting a little bit more weight onto what that low back needs to lift. When you get done, let yourself round back over that ball. Sometimes I will bring my knees out, kind of like that forward fold we did. Sometimes we can just open into that area a little bit more if our hips are spread wider. And I'm just going to position myself so that my hips are high, and dangling down from the hips are my legs and my torso. And I'll slowly come back up. I'm going to press both arms into the ground, and then I'm going to twist my torso just a little. So I'm just letting my left knee come a little closer to the floor on that ball, back to center, and then I'm going to let the other side come down a little further. My feet are lifted and kind of hooked together behind me. Okay, when you're done, you can just roll back down behind the ball. This might be a little tricky for camera angle too, but we will try. I'm gonna just lay down on the floor and then bring the ball to me so that my calves are up on it and it's right up against my thighs. Take a moment to make sure that your head and neck feel supported and your shoulder blades feel pretty even on the floor. I'll even reach down towards the ball and kind of flatten my shoulder blades into the floor a little bit. Feel free to bring your arms out to the sides if you want. It'll give you a little bit more balance. But essentially I'm going to do a bridge here. I'm going to take a deep breath in. As I exhale, I'm going to push into and away with my calves on the top of that ball, trying to lift my hips. And softly back down. Big breath in. Exhale and lift. Feel free to push into the arms as well. Good. So one thing you can do while you're just here on the floor, also, I call it a pelvic tilt. But as I inhale, I'm trying to make as much space underneath my low back as I can. As I exhale, I'm kind of rounding, so I'm flattening my spine as much as I can into the floor. And that's a horrible angle, and I don't need the ball, so we'll see if you can see my belly rolls. So I'm inhaling. Gosh darn, still can't really see without knocking that thing off the tripod. Maybe. Inhale and arch, so I'm making space. I can fit my hands underneath my back. Exhale, and it's sort of a tilt of the hips. Also very much, I'm pushing into my heels to really flatten my spine into the floor as much as I can. So inhale. Exhale. This is a good warm-up before bridges, just so you're getting that mobility. Okay, so back to the bridges. Makes it a little bit harder if I now have my heels and calves on the ball, but it's not pushed up right against my thighs. Again, make sure your shoulders and head are supported. Big breath in. As I exhale, I'm going to lift, and I'm kind of pushing my heels into the top of the ball now. So it gives me a lot more range. I can lift those hips a lot higher. If you're feeling really strong that day, you can extend the knees and then bend the knees. So amazing hamstring curl. But even just pushing that, you're making so much of the back of your body, from calves, hamstrings, butt, low back, even upper back and shoulders if you're pushing down with your arms. So you're activating so many of those muscles at once. I'll come slowly back down. Then I'm just going to let go of that ball. I'm going to capture my knees, pull them in over my chest. And I'm still trying to flatten my spine now into the floor. As we lift the knees, that becomes a lot easier. The low back rounds. You may be more comfortable here as I am, to where I'm just letting my knees fall out to the side. If you can, it's a little bit better stretch in some ways if you pull the knees in close together. But if that puts a lot of pressure in the center of your low back, spread the knees back wide. It flattens the low back a little bit and decreases that concentration of weight. From here, I'm going to move into an upside down cobbler's pose. So I'm bringing the feet into the center and giving them a gentle pull in towards the body, letting the knees push out to the sides. I would stay in this position until the inner thighs don't feel quite so tight. And then you can move into, in yoga, it's happy baby. So I'm opening my feet up towards the ceiling, pushing my knees just a bit towards the floor, and you'll really feel that low back flatten and expand. If that is hard or makes you lift your head and shoulders, then instead of holding onto the feet, just press behind the thighs, because we want the upper body to be as flat on the floor as we can. And then we're going to rock side to side. So we're just using our body weight here to massage the tight muscles surrounding our spine. When I bring myself back to center, I'm going to extend the legs, holding on still behind the thighs. And just let that stretch through the inner thighs. You can pull the legs in closer to your body if you want it to stretch low back, butt, and thighs. And then I'll soften the legs, bring them back in, and slowly lower my feet back to the floor. manage my ball. Okay, and lastly, I always like to follow these things up with a twist. So if you want the twist to be felt more in the hips as well as the torso, it makes sense then to extend that bottom leg and then pull the top leg over to the opposite side. I always deal with the lower body first, trying to find a comfortable place for that leg to land. So I'm bringing my foot to the floor so I don't have to let that weight just hang out into nothing. And then I'll think about trying to pull that opposite shoulder and arm back towards the floor. And I would recommend holding this for a minute or so. I'm not going to hold it that long right now. I'm going to slowly roll back onto my back, extend that leg, stretch both legs out, bring the other knee in, and then take a moment to make sure that shoulders and head are fairly comfortable on the floor. And I'm going to pull that leg across the body, find a place for the foot to rest, and then try and open up through the chest by dropping the opposite shoulder towards the floor. At this point, I'm just trying to let the weight of my limbs hold me in that twist, and I'm focusing on trying to breathe through it. With each exhale, I'm trying to let go of some of that tightness, that resistance. I'm going to sweep that knee back in, roll back onto my back, and lower the leg. If that feels like too much, some people prefer to do a twist where you have your knees up and squeeze the knees together, squeeze the feet together, and let both legs come together as one. I get a better twist through my internal organs from this, but I don't feel it as much in the hips and low back. But maybe you don't need to feel it quite as much yet if that is still too painful. So you have options. Good. Let's see if I can get my butt up. And lastly, with the ball, you've probably done a lot of just forward folds, just things like this to stretch out the back of the thighs, butt, and back. We're just going to use the ball to give us a little bit of support there. So I am just hinging forward from the waist, but I'm letting my arms roll out on the ball. So rather than the weight of my upper body pulling down into nothing, I am now supported. You can push against the ball a little if you want. I like to roll it out so far that I can let my head drop between my upper arms. Good. And roll back in. So I think that's everything I showed you, and maybe a little more. I hope those things are useful, and please forgive I'm at home during the cold snap. Yeah, feel free to email me back if you have questions. Bye.